everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Michael Yinger. He was referred to me by, actually, it was a company that was just kind of looking and thought he'd be a really good match for the Leadership with Heart podcast. And I have found I turn down a lot of people and I accept those. I'm like, let me sniff it out. Let me just see this. Somebody I think would be good. And in this case, I was thinking, yeah, Michael, you'd be a great fit. So I'm excited about the conversation. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I love these conversations.
So where are you right now anyway in your leadership journey?
I think the best way to think about it is I'm still evolving. I'm not a Buddhist, but I spent some time in a Buddhist country a couple of years ago and got a little taste of the whole philosophy of never really getting to the top of the mountain. I was actually doing some mountain climbing at the time, and I feel like that's the way the leadership journey is, at least for me, that it's you never really arrive. And I've had some pretty awesome experiences to be a leader. Some go way back and some have been fairly recent. And I learned something new from each one that I'm then able to apply to the next one. And so I don't know what the next one's going to be. And just keep working towards that concept that this is a journey, and you evolve as a leader, and I don't know that you ever really get there wherever there is. So that's my perspective.
Oh, it's so true. I people who listen to all these episodes from the beginning know I talk about that idea of progress and perfection and journey and no destinations. This is what you're talking about is completely. I didn't know it was really a Buddhist concept, but it is definitely my concept. Yeah. I don't believe it. I don't believe in perfection. Right? I just don't. Yeah, I don't. Right. I actually lean away from it. I lean away from, and then not that I am not someone who likes to do things well or likes to kind of show up a certain way. Obviously I do, but I feel like there's more excitement in a journey than there is to me in a destination. And so that's why I feel, and I know none of us are, perfect. So as to that extent, I know we never reach a place, but it's just so fun getting there, even in the down periods, right? What do you think?
Oh, that's where you learn the most. The experience of having to work through the whatever the down is, and pick your head up and just keep moving forward. And it's life's not perfect. No one's life is perfect. There are going to be challenges and opportunities no matter what you do, and it's how do you tackle them, and it's the perspective that you bring to it and what you learn from it. That's the fun part. I think it's actually the fun part of the whole journey through life is what are you learning as you're moving your way through.
So tell the listeners right now a little bit more about what it is you do, or what company you lead, just a little bit about that journey too.
Currently, I'm working on a startup with several other people. We have a product that's in the recruiting space. We help recruiters more effectively evaluate and rank resumes. And so it's a productivity tool at the front end of a recruiting process. I started out with this company at almost the very beginning. They had an idea, they had some intellectual property, and they came to me when I was in transition because of COVID, like a lot of other people, and said, "Oh, it looks like you're in transition. Would you like to come aboard and help us set up the company?" And so that was it was a unique experience for me to be the founding CEO of this company, and all the things that you have to do, the things that you have to think about. Now, I had done all of these things, sometimes more than one at a time, but I'd never had everything, the full responsibility, budget, people, making sure that we're moving towards a united goal. And it was an eye-opening experience in a lot of ways. One, because I found myself on a day-to-day basis not doing the same thing twice, ever. And the other thing that I found was it's a cliche, and it's lonely at the top. It is so true. The one thing that I didn't do, because I didn't know I needed to when I started the job, was to have a network of people in similar kind of situations. And so over the course of maybe the first 6 to 9 months, I just started to pick up other CEOs who were in startups, and we would just have conversations, what was working for them, what wasn't. And I found myself with some really interesting folks. One guy was a serial entrepreneur. Another guy was younger than my children and was on his first company, and we had some really great conversations about what was working for him and what was working for me, and sharing and whatnot. And so it really was putting a network together, because one of the things that I believe about being a leader is that you share the wins and you don't share the stuff that's not working. And I'm not talking about hiding things, because I'm not very good at hiding things. I have a terrible poker face. The dog knows when I'm lying. It's just so I don't lie, because it's just not worth the trouble. It's the things that aren't working, right? I certainly couldn't complain to the board about things that weren't working. And so, what I had to do was find this network of folks that we could talk about what was working and what wasn't working, and how could you do something differently to get it to work. So that part of it was just really, it was exciting, it was challenging. My wife and I would talk a lot, and she would, are you talking to anybody else? Is there anybody else you can talk to? Because you can't talk to the people, so to speak. What's not working, or we're running out of money, or whatever the case may be. Bouncing ideas and whatnot. So this has been a learning experience and continues to be.
I love that. I love the transparency and all. And I always say one of the kind of tenets in my last book, The Art of Carrying Leadership, the first one is self-leadership, and a subcomponent of that is making sure you have a good supportive network so that you don't feel like you're doing it alone. And so I really appreciate you kind of embodying that and sharing with us, because it's not easy to be in this role of leading people right. Looking to us for guidance in that way. So we do need to have and people give us different perspectives, and their journey might inform us on ours, and vice versa. And so I think it's great to give and to get in that process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's you got to have somewhere where you can bounce ideas off, because those conversations you have with yourself that never, they either get to somewhere that's just fantastic and not realistic, or they never get anywhere. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. You got it's amazing when you talk to other people and you're open to the feedback, what kind of perspectives you can get that might never, that certainly I have found just never would have occurred to me.
So I'm curious, for those who look to you for guidance now, or even in the past, how would they describe your leadership style?
I believe that they would describe me as open and empathetic to what's going on for them as people. I've done some personal empowerment training, and one of the things that I've learned from that training is that we don't often know ourselves, and so listening to somebody, having them get where they're coming from so that they can make their own decisions is so critical. I'm a firm believer in making sure that we're all aligned and moving in the same direction. All too often an organization resembles, a boat that's a circle with oars that are all rowing in different directions. And so, how are you ever going to get anywhere? Well, it's because there's never been a conscious attempt to align what the organization is trying to do and communicate that with what the people want to do. Because you have a conversation with somebody, maybe what they want to be is a chef. They don't want to be in this tech company. They're doing it because they need the job. Well, how can I help you be a chef? Even though if I lose you, still you're going to be better off, and we're probably going to be better off because you're not in alignment with where we want to go. Let's figure out where you can be in alignment. So I did a speaking engagement just recently with one of the people who used to work for me, and I was somewhat floored as she was describing me to the audience, because this is her perspective, and I hadn't coached her on what to say. And I mean, we kind of did this little thing where I introduced her and then she introduced me rather than introducing ourselves, right? And this is the way she saw me, was not being so much directive as being sort of empathetic to her situation and ensuring that she was successful in what she did. And I think that as a leader, yeah, you want the organization to be successful, don't get me wrong, and that comes from helping your people be successful, because that's what makes the organization successful. It's the leader isn't, unless it's a one person company, the leader's not doing much in terms of day to day actually servicing the customer, driving revenue, whatever the case may be. It's the people. And so how do you make the people feel like they're successful, that they're part of the organization? So I think that's what you would hear from people if you went and interviewed some of them.
Empathy is kind of a prerequisite to be on my show. So voila, I'll let you check the box.
All that
huge.
Without even asking.
I know, it's just huge. I think I always tell people, I've learned even more so during the pandemic and post George Floyd and all that. I actually have learned that empathy coupled with compassion are a double elixir. I call them a double elixir. They're like a 1-2 jab for knocking out many of the woes in our world. Yeah. And it's because the compassionate side is us taking action on behalf of another to alleviate their pain. And the empathy is kind of leaning in to understand that pain. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference. And sometimes people only want us to be empathetic and lean in and listen. And some of us want us to take compassionate action. And we have to get to the bottom of when that is and how, and when they want us to do that and what that looks like. So this is all good. I just love it. If people see you that way, I think that's a great way to describe you. So, okay. Where do you think your drive to lead comes from? So, when someone asks you to step up in the role you did, does your desire to say yes versus no come from someplace? Where does it come from?
At what point did I start stepping into things? And it was fairly early in my life, and so it may sound clichéic, but I could say it came from my parents, both who, in their own way, were leaders. My mother was an educator and then became an educator of educators. My father was a minister, and so there were those kinds of experiences that went on as I was growing. And I remember at some point I realized I wasn't afraid of volunteering. And that had a lot to do with it, right? Something needed to be done. No one wanted to do it, so my hand was up and I would be willing to do it. And often it was to get something done. It was to move something forward. And so I think it just was the nature of the kind of life that we lived in my household, that reaching out and offering to take charge, as opposed to taking charge, because there is a distinction there. It's offering to take charge. I'm willing to do it if you want me to do it. I'm not just assuming this responsibility. And it's kind of been that way through my career, that something needs to be done, and I'm often the first person to say, well, okay, I'll do that. It's taken me around the world. It's taken me to different countries and multiple careers at this point. I like to say I'm on the fourth half of my career journey in terms of all the different things that I've done with my life, that just you look at it and say, well, how does that lead from that to that? Well, it did. Right place at the right time. That's how I made those transitions.
Oh, wow. Oh, I always love to hear that. And I think many of us do get different leadership qualities from our parents. So I don't think it's really cliche. There's a reality to it. And when people say, well, it was when some people say it was related to like a coach or something like that, or, sports team, and they played on sports. And I'll hear that here and there. But yeah, it's always curious to me. Okay, so I'm curious now. This is the time of the podcast where I ask you to share a time when maybe you were not the best leader. Maybe you were not as empathetic. What did that look like specifically? And then what did you do to come out of it? Can you share just like one specific experience or story?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's one, obviously, it still resonates with me. I was responsible for the consulting delivery for a small consulting firm, and we were hit pretty hard by the burst of the dot-com bubble. So it goes back a few years. And we had a CEO who felt that the way to success was to continue to cut the organization. I could not explain to him that, at some point you don't have enough people to actually deliver the services that you've sold, but that didn't matter to him. And so I got to I got to do a lot of terminations. And one time I had a person sitting in the office, and they always hated it when I came into town because they knew why I was coming. I mean, we went through 7 rounds of layoffs before I got to lay myself off, which is a whole nother story. And so this woman comes into the office, and in 30 seconds, I had terminated her and let her leave. And I realized in the moment that I had really reached sort of a low point in terms of having lost empathy, lost compassion at that point. And going forward, I learned from that. It was kind of like a wake up call, because it just gotten to be, I was just doing these layoffs. Every 3 months I'd have to go and lay off 25 people, and make decisions on who was on the list and who wasn't on the list. Mm-hmm. And this was the low point. And, she took it and she walked out of the room, and she kind of knew what was going to come anyway. But that was a low. It still moves me. I can still feel it, right? That's how you know that something's important, is you can feel it. Your blood pressure's up a little bit. You're a little short of breath, whatever the case may be, because that was a learning experience, and I hadn't planned it that way. It just, boom, you're done. Here's your thing. See you later. Oh my God! I thought, okay, you got to get back to something that's more level. That's just not going to work. And so I did for the next few that I had to do, and then I got to lay myself off. So it was that was an interesting time for about 14 months going through that.
Gosh. There were 2 things you said. One that stuck out in the beginning, which is I got to do a lot of layoffs, which is a very interesting way for you to say that. So I'm going to go further on that. And the second thing is, yes, like wondering in my mind, was it you laying yourself off? Or what was it? What was the trigger? I know you said you felt different things, but was there something like you looked in the mirror? Was it just that interaction?
Once she left the room, I sort of caught my breath and said, "What did I just do?" Mm. And I was talking to my wife later and said, it was 30 seconds. She was in my office for 30 seconds. That's all she got. That was it. And that was a low point. That was definitely a low point.
It was just at that point, the mirror was like turned on you.
Yep.
Before that, you were able to kind of ignore it. But
I was in a zone. I was sort of numb to the whole process, because those are tough conversations. It was in that job it was the first time I'd ever had to fire somebody, much earlier in that particular job, and I was devastated. And I was firing this guy because he was a total scumbag. He had done something, company policy, thievery, something. I don't even remember now. But it was a closed shut case. There was no. It wasn't like, oh, is this the right thing to do? No, this was the right thing to do. And I was devastated by the experience of having to let this guy go. But boy, by the time I got to this poor woman, I'd gotten past that. I had gotten past that.
Oh my goodness. And then when early on you said I got to, and I know you didn't mean got to, like, yeah, this is so fun. Just take that, go that a little deeper in that. When you said, I got to do a lot of that, this thing happened, and then I got to do a lot of layoffs. Tell me where your mind was when you chose those words.
Yeah, no, it was a deliberate word, meaning there's a responsibility that goes with being a leader, that sometimes you have to do the hard things, and dealing with people's lives is hard. And especially when in these negative times, it's so easy, I think, when everything's good and the company's growing and everything's on the up, because most of your decisions are positive ones, or construed as positive ones. But boy, when it's the opposite to that, then it's a learning experience, and it can be difficult. It can be difficult. And again, this is another situation where you don't really have anybody to talk to, because you can't tell anybody. what's going on? This was just between me and the
Yep.
CEO and HR. It was, a lot of it was secret. Um, we did a round of layoffs in that office and called everybody else back in and said, okay, everything's cool, we're all done. And then I saw this guy sitting in the back of the room and realized that he was on the layoff list, but he wasn't supposed to be in the office. He was supposed to be on vacation. And so I had to call him after and say, remember that little speech that I gave? That doesn't apply to you. Sorry. You're on a plane. And it's, in this case, he was on a plane back to India because
Wow.
we had people who were on work visas. And so it was, got to it, my expression there wasn't intended to be glib. It was, this is part of what you sign up for when you're in one of these positions. And so it's how do you handle it? And as I've said, I didn't distinguish myself entirely all the way through it, although I think I learned from that. And I haven't had to do a lot of layoffs since then, but I've introduced a whole level of sort of different kind of conversation to the process when it's come up.
Mm, wow. That's pretty deep. There's a lot to be processing, I think, in that as we think about the responsibility of leadership. And one of the things I've evolved in over time, like whether I'm writing or I'm speaking, is, it used to be, it's so interesting. So before I would coach executives, before I even had an opportunity to be an executive coach, I would speak in terms of, yeah, organization, yeah, leaders. This is all on you, and these are all the things that you're supposed to do, and this is how you're failing. I'm just going to say this in short. This is kind of how it was. And I started coaching executive leaders, and I started to see them more as human,
Mm.
with all the imperfections and all the ups and downs and the hopes and the dreams, and some shattered and some still, all those things, right? And as I saw that, I leaned more into, well, wait a second. There's two sides to this. Yes, leaders need to take care, like the self-care, taking care of them, having the network, all the things I talk about in self-leadership. And at the same time, they have this dual responsibility to care for others in a way that's very unique to that role of someone in authority, or in a position of power, right? And then still holding on to that, thinking, and wait a second again. There's also the people who walk around the halls, no matter their titles, who still have a responsibility to show up more care, who still have the responsibility to lead themselves, who still have the responsibility for speak up and be accountable, like all the things. And so I started to become more and more broad in my thinking around this concept of leadership, self-leadership, leading other people, people looking to you for guidance, even if it's situationally in the moment, because we always think it's a title. And I am
Right.
evolving in that thinking more and more. The older I get,
Right.
I'm evolving in that thinking, partly because I have 4 children, you have 5, and my kids lead me so much. And I mean, they've been leading me since they were 2 years old. So,
Yeah. Yes.
right. They're not in a position of power or
Yeah.
authority,
Oh well,
but in the end, they
but
are.
because they know where the buttons are.
Exactly. So it's just funny how it all, kind of flip flops over time. And just, I think that's wisdom too, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's that that's part of that journey is moving along to I often forget what the right cadence is, but knowing and knowledge and wisdom, right? How do you move along that continuum to where you're actually able to begin to impart some of those things. And it was an interesting little article just recently that you just triggered it in my mind, talking about leaders and how often we put leaders on a pedestal. And the interesting point about this article was that it was making the case that particularly those very senior leaders, the CEO levels,
Mm-hmm.
they're really not as good as we want them to be or we think they are, because often they're being judged by maybe one success or two successes that they had, not based on their entire sort of body of work. It was very, very interesting. I was working with a friend who was really struggling with the CEO, and it just because they're in the job, leader. You touched on it. Leader
Mm-hmm.
is often something that we use as a title, And it's not a title, it's a skill set, it's all kinds of other things. One of the guys that I rely on a lot for advice says that the single most important characteristic for being a leader is having followers.
Hmm.
Because if you can't convince people to follow you, then are you leading?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think too, like going even more narrow on that, I think it's, as we look at it, it's following in, because it could be a moment to moment.
Yeah.
Because this is where the non-title thing comes in. Just literally
Right,
can be
exactly.
a customer following you down the hall because you know where to guide them to get to this particular thing, and you take them to the place they need to be. I mean, it's just, there's just so many positions. Again, we can take it down to the most minuscule moments and be able to point it out, which is why, again, that's been an evolution.
Yes,
I think, even though I
exactly.
already led that way, I was already that person, whether I had a title too. I think it just, one of those things just went like, boom, okay, I get it
Yeah.
now. Thank you.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay, so now we come to the point. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, no, no. Please.
We've come to the point now in the podcast where you get to kind of turn the tables, and you are a podcaster. So now you get to be the
Yeah.
podcast host of my show, and ask me any question you want related to maybe the work I do, or just anything that maybe is burning inside of you to ask.
Okay, so yes, podcast is an interesting environment. How do you decide who to have on the podcast?
Well, it starts and stops with me. So I am the deciding factor, even if I'm not like in contact with the person. I would have to say, I usually am looking at, if they're pitching me, then I'm looking at how they're describing themselves or being described by someone else. And there has to be some component of heart-led leadership in it. So there could be that their focus is on social responsibility. So there's things related to the planet, to the earth, to those in the environment, those in the community. It could be uh, their North Star is culture and leading people. It just, there's all these little things that for me is gut. And I there's maybe one time in all the episodes I can think of.
Oh,
And even in that case, that person ended up in my book. So, and it was because there was just one portion of it. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to release that part. But other than that, there are other components that were good. So I say that's pretty much the gist of it. It mostly goes through the gut. It's certain wording that they use. If it comes from someone that already is a listener, like those listening right now, or someone in the, like my social community who already has been following me and knows me pretty well from that perspective, I actually trust it on the surface. I don't question it, because I feel like they've been with me on the journey. They trust me and entrust me with their time. So I just take it. I don't do tons and tons of prequel after that. And it's always gone well. I don't know. We have pretty consistent listeners over the years, and I think it's gone well. Hopefully I never crash and burn.
yeah. That's awesome. And so how does the podcast, if it does, tie in with other work that you're doing, or is this all you're doing?
No, no, no. So I'm the founder and CEO of Employee Fanatics, and we are an employee engagement, DEI consulting, and leadership development firm. And so, yeah, first book, Seven Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty. Second book, The Art of Caring Leadership. And
Mm.
this book and the research in it is founded on the interviews from this podcast. And then the next book is The Art of Active Listening. And
Mm.
that goes even deeper into the stuff that, we do on the podcast, that the people talk about on the podcast, and the work we do at Employee Fanatics on listening. So it's all embedded together. It's just, I look at it as one additional medium, because some people just won't read a book. Some people will read a book and won't listen to a podcast. Some people read an article, so there's all these different ways. And if I continue to, I always say, socialize the messages on different mediums, and hopefully I'll get to different people. And luckily I've had some people like in Switzerland and Germany and
Yeah.
all over
Yeah.
the place. I didn't even know it. Someone reached out to me and said, oh my gosh, I'm so looking forward to your third book. And it was I couldn't tell where she was from, but it was just like this morning or yesterday. And she's like, I've been following you and I've read these books and I'm so excited for the third book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know you were out there, because not everybody reaches out. So if you're
Yeah.
listening
Right.
right now, don't forget to reach out. Tell me you're there. Where are you from? I want to hear about you. Oh yeah.
Uh,
Great questions.
and so I know you. I know you're trained as a lawyer.
Yes.
And what have you done since then? And I'm not saying to erase the lawyer stuff, but have you done other training to get to where you are today?
Well, I've got like certificates and things like that. But what it boils down to is that my upbringing created the person I am today, and it allows me to be a hyper aware person as it relates to human nature, human relations. And so the word, this work I do is just me. I embody it, not 100%, because I don't believe in perfection, but I
Yeah.
embody it. It's my gospel. I believe in it deeply, and it just fits.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but
Well, it
well,
does.
gosh, it's been many years ago. I practiced
Yeah.
many years ago. I still am active. I haven't, I mean, I have a license to practice. I just don't practice anymore. I haven't done it for years. So I like it that
Yeah.
way.
I took the test, but I got talked out of going to law school.
Not
I
a
went the
bad
business route
idea.
instead. You know.
Yeah, not a bad idea. Yeah, I mean, I'm fully
Yeah.
in business, and to be honest, I mean, even though I'm like, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. In the end, it has helped. It has helped me in lots of different ways, and my brain is kind of hammered in my brain some of the things they teach you, so it'll just never goes
Oh yeah,
away,
sure.
even in the business
Yeah.
world. Yeah,
Great
great
stuff.
questions. Look at that. Look,
Hey.
so you can tell. You can always tell when someone else is a podcast host. They ask great questions.
That's it. Just pick on little things.
Exactly. So, okay. So for those who are listening now who might, just they need a little extra inspiration just to get through their week, or they're just looking for some nuggets, what might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with today?
One of the things that I live by is persistence. I learned some one phrase in Swahili when I was doing climbing adventure several years ago. It's called pole pole, and it roughly translates to 1 foot behind the other, which seems kind of counterintuitive. It makes it sound like you're going backwards, but actually it's just, the idea is just pay attention to where you're going and follow the path. And you're never going to get to the top. And so if you're think about if everything you do is to get somewhere, to get something done, you're likely to be dissatisfied. And that's on you. That's your choice. Recognize that we never really get to the top. You look at some of the people that you might say are top of the world today. I mean, how much further can Elon Musk go? Well, he's going wherever it is. We may not know, but he's still going somewhere. He's not where he wants to be. And how much higher can you get than something like that? And yeah, it's just have that sort of self-awareness so that you're not caught up in that goal attainment as if that's all there is.
Mm, mm. So this idea of, yeah, I mean, this the getting something. I always look at it as like, how many more can I serve?
Yeah.
How many more can I positively impact? It's not like I have 2,500 people impacted this month. Boy, I reached my goal or anything like that. It's not
Right.
that way. Like you said, it's not the destination. It's just I like to call it the embodiment. It's like reflecting on yourselves for yourselves every day. What are you embodying? How do you feel good about that day-to-day journey? If you were to end today, if your journey ended today on the planet, would you feel good about what you embodied while you're there? I don't
Right.
know. Just something to reflect on. The good stuff there. Ooh, Michael, so glad to have you on here. I was just, yep. I told you, I rarely get it wrong.
That's awesome.
It's the
That
gut.
is
It's the
awesome.
gut.
Yeah. Yeah,
So for
that's it.
those, well, it is. And for those who are listening, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation too, and got some good nuggets, and heard his story and understood how he came out of it. And maybe you see yourself in that story. And if you love it, please do share this far and wide. That's how podcasts get recognized and move up that list. And we already are nicely ranked worldwide, but I want to keep going. And at the same time, don't forget to write the review. That 5-star review helps more leaders find it. So please do that. And again, Michael, thank you so much for agreeing to be on here. I look forward to staying connected for sure in the future.
Heather, thanks very much for the time, and I appreciate having the opportunity to share.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thanks for being with us in the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.